All right. Thank you, Lexi. I'm thrilled to have you all join us today. Gallaudet University is committed to bilingual, no, actually multilingual education, reading, writing, signing, and that benefits everyone around the world. I'd like to clarify that we're not going to talk about the hows of translation. We're going to talk about the power, the understanding, and the impact of translation and how deaf people navigate the world through deaf eyes. I'm thrilled to have you all with us today. I'll give you a moment to read the slide. Last year in August, we did have Deafhood Part 1. If you have not seen it, I encourage you to take a look at the website under past events, and we talk about deafhood and oppression of the deaf community, and this will help you understand the why. And you'll start noticing, why are deaf people showing up in the world today? Whereas 50 years ago, we never saw deaf people. This is going to help you understand why deaf people are showing up in our radar. Now, today's presentation, we're going to talk about how we navigate the world. And in March, our part 3, we'll talk about access, whether it's through Zoom or face-to-face, and we'll talk about best practices. All right. I'd like to clarify that I am a deaf presenter. And often hearing presenters will read the slide, but I don't do that. So I'll expect you all to be active readers. When I pull up a slide, I'll have you all read it. I will not sign it. And secondly, please feel free to use the chat. Share your thoughts, share your reactions, and that helps me as the presenter understand whether or not you're getting it or not. Please do use the chat. I will have questions throughout my presentation, and I'll ask you to answer through the chat, and I may make comments on several of your posts. At the very end, we'll have an interactive Q&A. And you can post your question or comment through the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will have your camera turned on and you can ask through video, whether you're speaking or signing. So if you provide training and videos and resources and you're captioning them, that is very important and crucial. Are you bringing in a sign language interpreter like we are today? That's wonderful and important. It's crucial and required, not optional. But does that meet everyone's needs? It does not. And we will talk about the why in a moment. Some of you might say, wow, interpreters are so expensive. I have to bring 2 and then I need to caption, and you're telling me it's not enough. I understand that some people are upset about that, but we're going to discuss that so you understand the why. And we're not asking for the moon. We're not asking for our own private trailer. We're talking about meeting human needs. There are a lot of resources and videos out there, webinars, seminars, and often they are not accessible to the deaf community, which is very frustrating. Now you add captioning, you add interpreters, that does shorten the bridge. But what we really want is the Golden Gate. We would love to have all bridges as beautiful as the Golden Gate Bridge. This bridge, I believe, is 6 lanes, 3 lanes each way. You can be on a motorcycle, you can be in a double-decker bus, a truck, a bicycle. This is the world that we would like to build together. That means your consulting, your knowledge, your training, your videos. This is our goal, to make sure that everyone can cross it, everyone can navigate, everyone can receive your information. If you bring in an interpreter or a captioner, that is the minimum, the bare minimum. That's like this type of bridge. This is a beautiful handmade rope bridge. Now, can I drive my RV over this? Can I bring a cargo truck over this? No, I cannot. If you bring in an interpreter and you have a captioner, yeah, we can understand most of the content. But it doesn't always include the context that we may need, the additional information that we may need. Imagine if you and I are trying to cross the bridge at the same time. I'm going one way, you're going the other, and we do our best with our hearts pounding to pass each other and cross that bridge. Now, it's better than nothing. We need to have this bridge. At the same time, it's not our goal. This is our goal. So we can work together. We can collaborate. We can develop together. We can share ideas and brainstorm. And we can share with investors, angel investors, venture capitalists. This is where we can dialogue easily, without trepidation, without shaking, with full confidence. That is our goal. That's our dream, that the world is built for all of us. Give you a moment to read the slide. I'd like to recognize, I mentioned this in my first presentation, but I'm going to mention it again. Gallaudet has been the university serving the deaf community for over 159 years. And there are businesses and restaurants surrounding the university, and only one of them is owned by a deaf person. Starbucks, there's a signing Starbucks that has deaf and signing staff. But let's ask ourselves, what's going on? Does that mean that deaf people are incompetent and not able to set up their own businesses? That is not the truth. So what is stopping us? That's what I would like to unpack. Language, context, and the idea that I'm showing you a sign where your mind and heart are captured and controlled by dominant society. that might look like, oh, hearing people know more than I do. Hearing people have more money than I do. So that is a training that I taught. That is what I discussed in August to help you understand what I mean by being, what autism means and how deaf people may view themselves. Please see the signing and the quote here on the video.
The gentleman on the screen, George W. Veditz, this is his sign name, a bent V on the chin. He was extremely concerned with oralism becoming more and more dominant and the banning of sign languages in schools. Massachusetts fired deaf teachers. There was a mass firing. Since they couldn't teach to speak, they were considered unqualified. However, they had already spent years and years of teaching, and so all of them were thrown out. This caused Veditz to feel concerned about the impacts on sign language and sign language being lost. He fundraised $5,000. This is 1913. I believe $5,000 in today's money value would be about $150,000 to create. He fundraised that money to create that video. It's one of the first Black and white videos with a deaf person of any kind. I watched the video 9 days. I see how he signs, how he carries himself. He's not using too much facial expression. He's got pursed lips. And just to see him on the screen really draws me in. It was a completely different era of sign language use. I can understand what he's saying. And for the deaf community, this is a very, very prized video and very valuable video to us. This isn't the only video that exists. There were other videos that were made of deaf leaders. They were gathered, collected, and it's housed at the National Association of the Deaf. And that was done back in 1913. Fortunately for us, oralism did start to take gain, but then was broken down. And that happened in 1965 when the Dictionary of American Sign Language was published, and it reflected that American Sign Language had linguistic principles and was a legitimate language, just like any other language, just like spoken languages are. And just to let you know, deaf people almost couldn't believe it. They'd say, no, it's not a language, it's broken English. That's what sign language is. And it took deaf people from 1965 to 1985, and I'd say pushing into the 2000s, before our own community accepted ASL in communication, in education, and so on. It took our community a long time. We ourselves carried a stigma of American Sign Language. And that's why that's what basically put us on the map. This is a short explanation of the series of events that led to that. Gallaudet University's mission statement also included American Sign Language and English for the first time in 2007, and the first time in their 150 years of prestige, which means that 2007 is not too long ago, but what, 16 years ago? Somewhat recent. And again, that's part of why the deaf community is now being recognized, because we are having the confidence, we are self-actualizing, we don't see ourselves through those stigmas. We've broken free from the stigmas. We've liberated, and now we're ready to work with folks. We're ready to partner. We're ready to develop innovations, new ideas. I can just tell you the community overall is excited. I'm excited. We're excited. Now we can understand each other and build a very, very robust bridge that will allow us to come together and interact. It's a very touching thought. I also want to be clear that some people say things like, oh, that was a long time ago. No, it wasn't. I am still seeing my peers and siblings that are deaf and hard of hearing throughout the United States. A lot of them are using sign language and don't sign nowadays. Imagine that. Many individuals are carrying the belief that to use sign language means one is inferior or unable, unintelligent. That really breaks my heart that people carry those feelings within them. We are doing the work of changing attitudes and biases and perspectives. The world will be a better place, a stronger place, when all of us are at the table and included. This training itself reflects those beliefs. Please review the slide. I want to recognize that, yes, our language, your language have a critical difference amongst them, and that is modality. The mode in which you use your language is through your mouth and through your ears. That's how you express and receive your language. We use our hands, our body, our eyes, three-dimensional space in front of us to express and receive our language. That difference is called modality. So I want to point that out, whether it's spoken English, spoken French, spoken Japanese, spoken Swahili, whatever language it may be. When I speak American Sign Language, going to English, going to maybe a different sign language in a different language, those languages are full-fledged languages that can express difficult concepts in a simple way. Abstract ideas as well. And I'll give you an example of that. One reason why the deaf community has always thought that sign language is based off English and considered it a slang or a broken English, right? That stigma has always been inherent to American Sign Language. And I'll give you an example of that. Let's look at this sign. This is the sign for mother. It uses a 5 hand, is what we call that. And then it's tapped on the chin. That means mother. So the English equivalent for that is mother. So if I talk to deaf people and I say, hey, what mom? Okay, that's what it looks like in American Sign Language. The response will be, what mom? That is M-O-T-H-E-R, mother. That's the response. But what we don't realize unconsciously is that M-O-T-H-E-R is borrowed from English. That's the term to describe a mother in English. But when we're asked in sign language what this sign means, we say M-O-T-H-E-R. We are basing our response on English. And it wasn't until Dr. M.J. Benavue, who is a linguistics professor at Gallaudet, retired, was professor emeritus, and was an amazing, incredible woman. She was also part of the queer community, but for her dissertation, she mentioned that one should develop an ASL dictionary. The community looked at that and thought, ASL dictionary, and this is before we had the internet. This is before things were online, right? Which meant it would have to be filmed on camera. So instead of the response being M-O-T-H-R when asked, what is the sign? The response should be, this sign is the person who bore me as their child. That should be the response. What does the sign mother mean? Okay, it's the person that had me. That disconnects the mind from the English language. When we had that realization as a community, it was very gripping. It was a huge epiphany for everyone. That led the community to think about sign language and realize that sign language has its own syntax, different than English. The two languages come together when it comes to spelling. And American Sign Language borrows from English in order to spell things out. In the 1870s, there were poets that were writing ASL poets. Now, The process back then was to first write it into English and then figure out how to express the English into American Sign Language. So there was a translation. And it wasn't until Allen Ginsberg, a very well-known poet, met with a group of deaf individuals in the 1890s at some point, and they were having a conversation where Allen realized that he needed to stop the conversation. He said, "Time out, everyone." And he asked the deaf folks, "What language are you writing in?" And the deaf people responded, "Well, we're writing in English." And Allen said, "But you sign and communicate with your hands in a different modality. So why is it in English?" The response was, "Well, we believe that poetry, proper poetry, is written in English first." Allen's response was, "No, poetry can be expressed in any language. It's not dependent or bound to English." And then the deaf community responded with a surprise. And then the deaf community started creating their own poetry in ASL only. And excuse the interpreter, that might have been 1890, the interpreter said, when it's 1980. So when that happened, there was a mass of ASL poets, which was really drew in the deaf community. I do have a clip that I wish I had here to show you. It's one about a dandelion. It is a poem that talks about how a dandelion's life goes, right? And you know how a dandelion can be blown away. And that was by a gentleman named Clayton Volley. Clayton Volley. And let me see if I can find it, because it's such a nice poem to see. Okay, I don't want the interpreters to voice this. Audience members, I want you to see the gestures that are happening on the screen, the sign language, and I want to see if you can understand it. Here it is. He signed yellow flower, and it starts. A man comes and yells, "Dandelion!" He's now embodied a flower. This is Marvin speaking. Okay, I'm not sure how much of that video you captured and understood. That's fine. But what was just shown is the life cycle of a dandelion. And then there's a person, a man who mowed his lawn, mowed the yard flat, and then the dandelion came up from the ground, right? And then of course it puffed out. And then the man saw that, and then he yanked it out of the ground, which caused the seeds of the dandelion to just spread and blow. But you saw the visual representation of a dandelion swinging in the wind. When it's pulled out, you see the seeds spread in the air. That reflects language. And that's my emphasis, language. American Sign Language, whether it be other sign languages like Black American Sign Language, I'd like to ask, were they invented in a committee? Did we all sit together in a room and say, we need to figure out how to communicate? Let's talk about coming up with signs. That was not the way sign language was developed. It developed naturally. As you can see the statement on the slide here, in Nicaragua, this is a sign for Nicaragua, around the 1980s, when a deaf school was first opened. Again, this is late. Most deaf schools in other places were already running, but here it was until the 1980s. The deaf students went there to learn American Sign Language. However, the kids pointed out that American Sign Language is from America, from the United States. They're in Nicaragua. They didn't want this influence from an outside country. So the first cohort, the first group of students, what they did is they had something called home signs. And I'll tell you what home signs are. Maybe they're the use of iconic signs. Like if I do this, it looks like I'm eating something. Or if I do this, it looks like I'm laying in a bed sleeping. Or if I say, I'm going to walk this way, right? These are just basic gestures that are used to iconically represent needs in life, right? Let's say you need a book. You would say, book, I'm looking for a book, right? Something like that. Those types of signs are what are considered home signs. This cohort came together and had some of those home signs that they used. There was a second cohort that also had home signs that came into play. Now, that first cohort had developed quite a number of signs. When the two cohorts came together, there was a dynamic where they noticed that the language became more sophisticated. It became a Creole form. It wasn't a full language yet, I should point that out, but it was Creolized at that point. There was a third cohort that came in that also used home signs. The interaction and dynamicism between the three cohorts established the grammatical rules and all the complexities that they entailed, and it became their Nicaraguan Sign Language. And I want to be clear, a language is not something that is invented in a committee. It is naturally developed because the mind will find a way to express language, regardless of how it's expressed. So the brain connects with the ears and with the hands. And so this leads to the difference in sign languages that we have. And I want to emphasize this. Let's say you say, we want to take all these deaf people and put them on an island somewhere. Hey, we'll be fine. I can promise we'll all be fine. Throw us all on an island and we will have a beautiful civilization together there. The point of this slide is that sign language is natural.
Okay, go ahead and watch this slide. Okay, so remember I mentioned that today there are many, many deaf and hard of hearing students who have no access to sign language. They're literally prevented from learning sign language because people are saying they must speak, they must read lips, and there is a myth that if they learn how to sign, then they will not use their speech or lip reading capabilities. And that has been proven to be untrue. We're saying here that sign language is a birthright for all deaf children. And we hope that from birth to every year of education, deaf and hard of hearing children will have their birthright to language, and they will make a huge impact in the world. We strongly believe that. Okay, so the goal of today's training is to help you understand that translating from one language to another in the business environment is a challenge. And our goal is to discuss the possibility of having deaf trainers provide resources and content. So while you have captioning and sign language interpreters, that is not the ultimate goal because of translation. Translation requires context, and we'll discuss that in a bit. But first of all, I'd like to recap information about sign language. Not only American Sign Language, but sign languages around the world is a complex, rule-based language. We have phonology, morphology, syntax, just like any other spoken language. Now, for me, I'm 51 years old. And when I was 44, I went back to Gallaudet to complete my bachelor's. After my freshman year, I left college to do a lot of different things. I tried to set up the world's first signing community in South Dakota. And after many, many years, I decided to go back to Gallaudet. And I was very fortunate to study under Dr. MJ Benvenue. And she analyzed ASL and English. And I thought I knew my stuff, but I did not. I was shocked after taking her class. Now, in the deaf community, we always said English is so important. You have to learn, you have to be fluent in English, even though many people in the deaf community struggle to read and write English. Now, my parents were deaf. My father was really involved in the deaf community, in the deaf clubs, deaf bowling. My father always said, oh, my English is lousy. I'm not comfortable in English. I always misspell things. So he would ask me to clean up his emails or clean up his letters, and he was embarrassed. So once I took this class with MJ Benvenue, so let me explain this to all of you, but the question is for the deaf people in the audience. If I'm 4 and you start this sign at the chin, and then you face your hand forward, that's one definition of the word 4. But if you move your hand like that, that means $4. Or if you put your hand with the backside facing out, that is a number 4. Or if you put your hand like this, that means 4th place. If 3 of us or 4 of us go somewhere, we would sign 4 like this. Just simply the position of our hand has very specific meaning in American Sign Language. So when I left Gallaudet, I went home and I said, hey, Dad, do you know what? You have tremendous grammar. And my father said, what are you smoking at Gallaudet? And I said, no, that's not what I mean, Dad. So on purpose, I would make a mistake. I would say, hey, can I say I'm 4? And I would position my hand, the wrong way. Or do I have 4 cars? And my father would say, you're signing wrong. He would correct my signs immediately. And I said, Dad, that's ASL grammar. You got 100%. And for the very first time in my father's 70 years, he said, really? And I said, yeah, Dad, that's ASL grammar. In your first language, ASL, sure, you're struggling in your second language, which is English. He was like a deer in the headlights. He said, I I am an expert in language. This was hard for me to see this with my father. Why am I learning this at the age 44? Why is my father learning this in his 70s? We should have learned this in elementary school. That was a very poignant moment. So go ahead and answer this question in the chat. How did you all learn English grammar? Please go ahead and type your answers in the chat. Go ahead. Okay. In the classroom. You got Spanish and English in the classroom, at school, through your family. Hearing English all of your life, right? Kindergarten, at ASL at home since birth. Okay, thank you for your answers there. A lot of practice at home. Yes, good answer. So at home, those of you who speak English with your family, or Spanish, depending on your family language, that's called your mother tongue, right? You learned it from your family at home. Now, 95%, now you may have an English teacher at home that are going to correct your grammar, but most of us learn English grammar at school. English to read and write. We learn that at school. That's most of us, right? Now for deaf people, in almost all deaf schools, even today, we do not offer ASL in school. You can learn ASL, you can take ASL classes in high school, but not in elementary school. Now, deaf parents, which is only 5% of the deaf community, so 5% of deaf people were born to deaf families, and I was in that family. 95% are born to hearing families, and most of them do not sign. The parents do not sign. So those deaf parents who have who are fluent in sign language may question why their children are taking ASL at school. And I would say, no. There's a lot more to language. You have to understand the structure, grammar, how to present, proper register. And some deaf parents of deaf children will fight those classes. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of distorted thinking about our own language. And now we're starting to work with all of you to discuss business training, resources, all of these materials, while I still have a distorted view of my own language. So that will continue the problems that we have today. So we have a need for deaf people to practice business in their own language. So do we fully understand the power of language? We do not. Often we don't appreciate the power of language. And often deaf people might say, oh, sign language is just for social reasons, but for business purposes and professional purposes, we need to keep it in English. That is something that we in the deaf community need to work on. So I'm changing topics a little bit to talk about values. So I have a question for the deaf people in the audience. What do we value as a deaf person? So these are our values. Now, The best deaf presenter will use body language, facial expression, and movement using 3D space. Now, a hearing person, their values are listed here. Now, touching really depends on culture. In British culture, American culture, Canadian, we might tell the hearing community, feel free to tap me on the shoulder. And many people would say, oh, no, we can't do that in these particular cultures that do not touch. But as a deaf person, I like to share this joke that hearing people in the audience, you know, this is one sign for addiction, the X on the mouth, and you are addicted to your hearing. With music, my goodness, apparently you cannot live without music. There's music everywhere, in the food store, in a restaurant, even in the bathroom, movie theaters. If there's no dialogue, if there's, you know, I imagine maybe if there's a car chase, you'll hear the cars, but there's even music during a car chase. Wow. Music is everywhere in your lives. If you want to change the mood, you change the music. If you break up with someone, you might turn on some country music and eat ice cream and cry, which is amazing and surprising for deaf people. Of course, it's not important for us, although some of us do enjoy music. We might turn on the bass. Some of us hear more than others. There's a lot of variety in the deaf community. But my point is, the best hearing presenter will rely on their tone of voice. President Obama, for example, was one. He was a beautiful speaker. Even if he was to read a grocery list, I think everybody would say, oh, that's so beautiful. Compared to other presidents, maybe Trump has a different delivery style. And his use of body with Trump was very limited. So now I've listed the values of the two different communities. And it's just important to embrace and accept both. Now notice there we have 3D space in the deaf community and linearity in the hearing community. Give me a moment, I need to grab my cord.
Okay, I've got my cord holding out up to the camera here. Now, the way a hearing person speaks English, right? That's what I'm about to describe. You will use your voice. And I really want to exemplify the difference. I'm trying to give this some thought. In English, you speak word by word, and those words have a certain order. You can't say 3 or 4 words at the same time. The ear will not understand the garbled sound. So English has a linear expression. It goes word by word and is expressed in sound. 12 years ago, in a classroom, this person now is a superintendent at a public school with a PhD in linguistics. So I don't have a citation for this. I apologize. That's why I preface my comment with that. I was taking a class from this person, and they pointed out what's on this slide. Okay. The human brain, when receiving audio information, the human brain can hold up to 6 seconds of that audio sound before the mind has to interpret or make sense out of that input, right? Once it understands those 6 seconds, it moves forward to the next 6 seconds does the same process, then again, in the next 6 seconds, the process repeats. And so I was very curious and asked this professor, what about the eyes? And the response was, well, the brain processes visual input in 3-second segments. And I thought, well, that's not fair. The ears get seconds to process and the eyes only get 3. Why the difference? Okay, so I was in an uproar about that. And so this is where my wire or my cable cord here comes into play. You see the sentence on the screen. I will go to the store to buy new shoes tonight, right? You see that? It comes in a line into the mind, right? And the ears receive that in a line. The ears are like a straw. Things have to come in a direction, kind of like this cord that I'm holding, in a straight line. For a long time, the deaf community used to say, oh, American Sign Language is so cool because our expressions are shorter. They're summarized versus comparison of the English language. I always felt off about using the term summarized or a summary of the English language. It just didn't sit right with me. It made American Sign Language seem like a shortcut, and that is not the case. I keep holding up this cord and wire. Let me ask you, do our eyes take in information like a straw does? Do our eyes take in data or information in a linear fashion? No, the eyes don't. The eyes work in 3 dimensions. We see the space in front of us. We see our eyebrows, our nose, our lips. We look up when we want to talk about going upstairs or downstairs or any motion. So our eyes perceive the world around us. Look at this cord I'm showing you. Let me tangle it up. I see this wire and I understand its 3-dimensional state, right? How do you compress something that is a long linear piece, and how do you shorten it? Like this, you wrap it around itself. But let me ask you something. Did I cut any portion of my cord? No, I didn't. It's all there. The cord is still here. It's been reduced in size, but it's all still there. And that was when I finally got it. I realized, okay, our sign language has structure, but the structure is optimized for the eyes. 3 seconds is all the mind gets to process that visual information, rapid succession. For years and years in the deaf community, educators of the deaf and hearing spent tons of time obsessed on teaching deaf children English. They felt it was very important to learn English to succeed in the hearing world. So with that obsession, quite often, false sign language or signing systems were developed that weren't languages, that weren't natural. Most often, they're called methodological signing styles. They use signs from American Sign Language in an English structure. So I want you to imagine this. See that sentence on the slide. If I were to go ahead and follow an English structure, and I'm going to sign this real slow, this is what it would look like. I will go to the store to buy new shoes tonight. Okay, I've just signed that in an English structure. Remember, the eyes only have a 3-second capacity to process information. So I will go, boom, those 3 seconds are up. To the store, boom, those 3 seconds are up. To buy new shoes, boom, 3 seconds are up. New shoes tonight, that the buy new actually gets interrupted. So the mind is processing those pieces of information in those 3-second time limits. Now, answer me in the chat. I'm not going to make it easy for you. I'm not going to ask you what's in the first group of words. I want to ask you, what was the third grouping of words that I just said? Answer me in the chat. Oh, buy. But let me think through that again. I believe so. You might be right there. Tonight. There was something about buy and tonight. You're right. Let me open it up. Congratulations. However, you did leave out the to and the a, right? You did mention buy. So let me ask you, in the second grouping, what words are in that bubble? Was it new store? I don't know. I think store was definitely a part of it. There we go. We see it populating now. Oh my goodness, this one says dress instead of shoes. My apologies. Okay, you get the point. The point is, imagine a 5-year-old deaf child looking at their teacher, signing in that English syntax or grammar, and every 3 seconds that the teacher says something, I will cut off information being processed to the store, cut off information processing. Is that 5-year-old deaf student going to remember each component of the utterance? Or do they have to work really hard to stitch that back together to say, oh, yeah, I think you said something about going somewhere, a store, new shoes or something? When in American Sign Language, the grammar is completely changed. We don't take that same linear process of defining the subject, the object, the verb. No, it would probably come across with, okay, looking at my shoes, I got new shoes, I might go buy them tonight. And I don't know if the interpreter spoke it in English or spoke it in American Sign Language grammar. That depends on the interpreter. But still, let me break that down for you. I looked at my shoes. I said, new shoes. I need to go get some tonight. That was done within 3 seconds. All that information was shared in 3 seconds. That was quite a revelation to me. Now, again, this isn't a training explaining how to translate between languages. Now, this is a training giving you a high-level overview of what's involved in translation between languages. And now I do have to mention something quite unfortunate. You see 3 columns on that slide. In the middle column, you see that linguistic oppression. Those are the artificial sign systems that are developed. Notice that there's a repetitive word in that middle column, and that word is English. I've already talked to you about the absurdity of signing in English order when the brain processes visual information in 3-second bits. It just doesn't fit. Now there's what's called, you see the morpheme sign system, MSS. I am presenting from South Padre Island, Texas, and that MSS system is used in a school up north, and they teach students with that morpheme sign system. What they do is they break down to the smallest unit of morpheme. Like, for example, this sign right here, butterfly. This is a sign for butterfly, right? You can see a visual representation. You see the vision of a beautiful orange butterfly in the sky, perhaps. What they're signing, that's the sign. What they're signing at this school is but, as in accept, but, then and then fly. It's broken down into its separate morphemes. This is crazy. Deaf students have to sit there and deal with that. Why do they have to sit there and suffer like this? Because the value placed on the supremacy of the dominant language, English. That is what skews our entire educational system. That is what Gallaudet University is dealing with when those students arrive to the university. A lot of students aren't connected with their identity. They don't understand the language. They're not connected with their culture. Even less if they are Black, Latino, minority, deaf person with a disability, or deaf and blind. Gallaudet is the center that is getting these individuals caught up. This is why GIEI at Gallaudet, their role is extremely critical. in breaking down those years and years of barriers so that we can succeed, so that deaf people can finally fly free. Russ Stein, Lorenzo, Tiffany, three of them have worked diligently with GIEI, a competitive program. They offer the training. Amazing what they offer. And it really excites me, the work that they're doing. Okay. For the sake of time, I see we are running low. I want to speed up presentation here. Talked about language structure. You see the difference between English and sign language, but there's more. When I watch movies and I see captions, that always catches me off guard, because one of the strangest things that hearing people is just so odd about you folks, and I can't figure out. Let's say it's a romance movie, right? Let's say the fellow's name is Bob and there's a character named Mary. They will look at each other and they'll use each other's names while looking at each other. Mary, I love you. Mary will say, Bob, I love you. For me, when I watch that on the screen, I ask myself, why do they have to say each other's names? They're already looking and talking to each other. I don't understand the reason for it. I just can't figure it out. I don't understand that about hearing culture. And I ask myself, how odd is that? You're looking right at the person, there's no one else around, and you still say their name. However, it wasn't until, and let me ask, how many of you remember when Apple released iChat? That was the first time you could have a four-way conference. What a thrill to be able to have a conversation between four people, if we all remember that. Of course, we do that in Zoom nowadays. But it was so exciting to see a friend of mine on the right, another one on the left, one in the middle, so on and so on. Something that caught us off guard is that we weren't spatially correct, meaning that the person that I was seeing on my left didn't have the same perspective I did. It felt like we were sitting together in a group, but we weren't. These people were sometimes randomly sitting somewhere else. So when I would look at the screen on my left and think I was talking to a certain person and say, hey, so-and-so, the person on the right side would answer with a yes. And I'd say, hey, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the person on the left. And they say, no, you're looking right at me. Then I finally realized why we have to use names, or why you have to use names in the hearing culture. I said, no, John, I was talking to you. You're on my right. John says, well, I don't see you on my right. You're on this other side. And then I realized, okay, I need to indicate who I'm talking to. Now, if we are in a physical setting in the real world, we don't need to use that to communicate, because we just look in the direction that we're talking. That's when it finally hit me. Oh, I get it. Hearing people must have grown up in a house where they had family members or friends or someone in another room. And when you wanted to indicate who you're talking to, you would say the name. Otherwise, anyone else in the house would think you're talking to them. So you need to direct what you're saying to a person, and you do that by saying their name. So it becomes second nature. So even though you're looking at each other, it feels like it's the norm to state the name of the person you're talking to. As deaf people, as a culture, we don't do that. We are looking at the person we're having a conversation with.
So this, in sign language, we sign, it's almost like a movie. We set the scene. Where are people standing? Where's the tree? Where's the audience? We use that whole space. We're very explicit about where things are set. It is not abstract. So in hearing culture, you use language in a more abstract way. So if somebody is sitting in another room, you don't know where they're sitting, you don't know what they're wearing, but you can still communicate with them by calling their name. So this is an example. This is a landmark frequently asked questions page. Landmark is a professional development course. I've taken leadership courses there, and I was required to sign or generate my own narrative, not by reading English and interpreting it, but this is the English version on the Landmark website. What is Mr. Enhard's relationship to Landmark? That was a question, and here's the answer. Okay. So that is the answer. And I was sitting with my coach, who is a sign language interpreter, a hearing person. And I was really struggling with signing this passage. And my coach said, hey, don't translate it. Just express your points in sign language. And I said, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this. It didn't feel right with me. And I had to reread this passage. And the bottom line answer to the question is not in the first paragraph, nor in the second. That's the answer, the very last paragraph. So I realized, well, there it is. So I started the answer with the last paragraph and then continued on to the first paragraph, then the second. That was smooth to me. Now, when hearing people present information, they may start with some general information and finally get to the point at the very end. Deaf people, that does not work for us. We're going to struggle. We're going to wonder, what is your point? Where's the beef? What's the point? By the time you finally have reached the point, you have lost us. And this is back to our visual language. Imagine this. And I might say, wow, something happened to my hand yesterday. It's awful. I'm going to show you later. But I'm going to tell you what happened first. And you tell this whole story. I was walking, I fell, or whatever. Imagine if I did that in real life with you all. You'd be like, what are you doing? Why have you covered your hand? Why are you being so dramatic? So now once you can see my hand, you could see some fingers are missing or whatever. Isn't that awful? It hurts really bad. Then you go into the story. We show. Seeing is believing. And then you've captured your audience. If we simply reorder our presentation, that will attract the deaf audience. And maybe some of you hearing people listening to my presentation are a little bit lost as well because of the interpretation. That's my point. So when you talk about translation and the power of translation and the oppression that may happen, this is something I mentioned in my first training. I label this sort of a funny label, which is magic macaroni cheese syndrome. There's a deaf woman who wrote several books, and she has a chapter on this. We have a hearing mother with 3 children. The first 2 are hearing, the third is deaf. And the deaf child is about 3 or 4 years old. And the deaf kid said, hey, Mom, I want macaroni and cheese to eat. And the mom said, okay, I'll go cook some now. And the deaf kid said, no, I want some now. And the mom said, yeah, I'm going to cook it. And then the deaf kid had a temper tantrum. And the mother asked Karen, this deaf author, what's going on with my child? And Karen said, well, maybe before you cooked macaroni and cheese and your child didn't know it. They're in the living room. They don't know what you're doing. Well, your hearing kids may hear you moving around in the kitchen, opening the refrigerator to get the milk and opening the box, boiling the water. So the hearing kids already know you're in the process of cooking macaroni and cheese. And so they're going to be ready to eat. But the deaf child playing in their room, it's so quiet. They're in their own world. And all of a sudden they get a bowl of magic macaroni and cheese. It's like it comes from nowhere. How wonderful. That is what we always mean by incidental learning and the lack of incidental learning that happens in the deaf community. I'd like to spotlight Lorenzo, please. And so he can share his story about incidental learning. Hello, everyone. I must share this story. I always share it whenever I am speaking with a hearing audience who may not understand incidental learning. So I'm a deaf person. My partner is hearing. And one day we decided to go to Starbucks. So we went into Starbucks. It was a very long line. I was minding my own business, texting on my phone until we got to the front of the line. And we picked up our coffee and left. And my hearing partner said, "Whoa, I just listened to people talking while we were standing in line. Congress has a new bill. A business just closed down just a few blocks from here." She shared all of this information with me. She just learned while standing in line at Starbucks. And guess what I learned? I learned about the price of my coffee. That is a real life experience that deaf people go through every day. We're always the last to know if we're fortunate enough to have somebody share that information with us. You have the privilege of hearing for information 24/7. And often when we learn it, it is a very intentional approach to educating us or for us to learn on our own. This is Marvin here. Imagine if we all signed. If we were sitting at the dinner table at a restaurant and we can watch people across the table or across the restaurant, then we can understand each other. And that is the one downside of sign language. If you're talking about something in private, you better be in private. But in general, we miss out on a lot of information, incidental information. I'll let you read the slide. It is important to recognize, and it's important to create processes, programs, and trainings to fill in the gap of all of this missing information. That's why a deaf trainer can recognize what information is lacking in the deaf community and fill in the gaps, fill in the blanks. More and more we'll see certified deaf interpreters on screen. So you see Ellie Stein in the small box. She is a deaf person who is interpreting for the White House. She works with a hearing team who the hearing interpreter often signs like this. And the deaf interpreter needs to create a fully translated message so the deaf audience can understand rather than struggling with the linear sign language that hearing interpreters may provide. When a certified deaf interpreters, often they think, oh, they're before CDIs were prolific, people would think that deaf interpreters were for less intelligent deaf people. But now that we see them more and more on screen and in life, deaf people realize, oh, this is easier for me to digest the information. It's more understandable because it's more visual. So here, the word run, English word run, and I'm going to give you some signs for run. Is your nose running? Is the engine running? Or is a person running? Those are just a few signs for run. But if you use the wrong sign for run, if you say my car is running, people will say your car has a nose and it's, you have boogers coming out of your car. What? So translation is very important.
I see that in the chat. The benefits of CDIs are that the information processing time is cut almost in half because of the effective delivery. So thank you for pointing that out, Eugenio. For example, in business trainings, we often say, it's okay if you develop an elevator pitch, right? But this sign means an actual mechanism and a conveyance, an elevator. And then the sign goes pitch, right? And it's like, you want me to throw a ball in an elevator? That's what that looks like in American Sign Language, right? So that's why I have an image of an elevator and then a picture. But within the deaf community, we don't have a lot of deaf people in white collar spaces. So our familiarity with that context doesn't exist. We don't understand what an elevator pitch means. So instead, I'm going to use this as an example. Okay, this is a brief, short example. The Lauren Claire Classic, it's a tournament for high school age. 8 schools compete in an academic bowl. They recently had it in Fremont, California. There was about 1,000 people there, and I had short conversations with each one of them. So within that context, we could say, imagine you're in a group of people and you want to tell them your business, but you know that they have a short amount of attention. That's the elevator pitch. The person will then understand, oh, I only have a couple seconds to be able to explain my goal or my idea. That's the way we get elevator pitch across. This is just one example. It's just a one-off example on how to do that. And that context would make sense within the deaf community because they understand that. Now let's talk about imposter syndrome. That is also not understood, like the run example, right? Often terms like this require context for understanding. Once they're described, that could help a deaf person understand something and really accelerate their business. Okay, I'm looking at the clock again. I know we are short on time and I do want to get through this. This is another example, which I am going to skip for sake of time, but let me just mention the deaf community is still making discoveries on how we view deaf-blind individuals and how sign language itself is oppressive. There's something now called vidism, and that's covered in this video. The person says the topic for today is vidism, and I'd like to explain that there are no formal publications on vidism. It is racism in language that comes up in context. And there are parallels between vidism and autism, but they aren't exactly the same. Vidism connects with attitudes that are entrenched in dominant society on how we think about our eyes. For example, I see a lot of vidism within the deaf community. Some communities within the deaf talk about autism, while the deaf community itself practices vidism and forgets those that are deaf and blind. There's a disconnect, and we are left out many times. And it's not just about attitudes and barriers that are entrenched within society and culture. It also includes the language. The language emphasizes the visual. Let me give you an example. I'll use the word recognition. Most folks understand what that term means. Let me ask the audience members. I have an interpreter here that will tell me what the audience member is saying. This person says, and the interpreter is describing the gentleman who is responding. The speaker asks, what is the sign for recognition? And the person says, hook on the eye and then hook to the hand. And now the speaker is saying, what an interesting sign, isn't that? Let's break down that term. Recognition starts with re, which is again, and then cognition means that there is a comprehension or an understanding. So it's a new understanding again, right? So it's capturing of an idea. So let's say you taste food and you say, oh, I've had this before, I recognize it. Or you smell a certain odor and you say, oh, I remember that smell. You have recognition. But the sign for recognition starts at the eye and ends at the palm. That sign should start at the mind and end at the palm. And now Marvin Miller is speaking, yeah, emphasis on that. Recognition is mental. The speaker continues to say, American Sign Language forces us to continue to only think with our eyes. But if you're deaf and blind, how can one feel a part of the culture if we can no longer see? Does it mean I'm unable to recognize something? Have I been unable to recognize things for the last 2 years because I haven't been able to see for those 2 years? I still have recognition through my sense of smell, my sense of feel, my sense of taste. I still have recognition. This is Marvin speaking. That is a great example of me as a member of the deaf community, not realizing how we practice linguistic expression through our language use. Now, I've got another mind-shattering example. I have on the slide Canada's national anthem. It's a beautiful anthem. Oh, Canada, it starts with. As you can see, I have the official English version on the screen, and then I have the official French version on the screen. They both are identical, right? Now, here's what's going to be really mind-shattering. For me, this completely blew me away. I did a French translation back into English. Let's compare those pieces again. I think we can agree, wow, these aren't identical. However, the goal, the aim of these words are to inspire, to motivate. They have the same goal. They serve the same purpose. And it made me realize, what sounds good in one language might not sound good in another language. What makes sense to a particular culture in one language might not make sense to another culture, maybe in that same language or in a different language. When I saw this, I realized we have permission. We have permission of, instead of being bound to the English grammar or to the English expressions, we have permission to look at context. We have permission to see how things are defined in expression. Let's talk about the Star-Spangled Banner, right? It starts with, oh, say, can you see, right? If we look at the historical context, the person that wrote the Star-Spangled Banner was sitting in a ship, a ship that the British Navy had captured, right? And that Navy was circling the fort there. And there was a flag that was up and the cannons were going off. And as the Star-Spangled Anthem was written, the person was looking at the flag, excuse the interpreter, and they knew that if the flag were to be lowered, then they had lost the battle, right? So their preoccupation the entire night and sunrise was looking to see if the flag was still there. And so I want to show you a video. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. This video does not have sound. You know the lyrics to the national anthem, but I want you to look at the signs and see what's being set up within the sign language space. The interpreter starts with a ship. They're motioning that they're standing on a ship. Just a little longer. Okay, again, for the sake of time, I got to rush through this part. I do want to give you a Q&A session. Let me point out that a lot of deaf community members who saw that particular translation were very touched because of the visual imagery. That translation was laid out describing that battle that Francis Scott Key wrote the Star Spangled Banner lyrics to. This slide is a recap. First, we need freedom. Freedom to dig deep for a translation. If it's a business idea, business presentation, business training, that translation has to be delivered in a way that allows for comprehension, that incorporates additional context, often necessary context that the deaf community is missing. So we have to think of the delivery, and if it's delivered appropriately, then it could really cause exponential growth. And so the bottom line is, as you see on the slide, if you want to see successful deaf business owners throughout the country, you really need to invest in your training. Bottom line is, we want you. Gallaudet University stands ready to support you, ready to support your center, your organization, to identify and analyze the resources, existing resources that you have, and how they can be enhanced for accessibility, not just accessibility, but so that it could fruition in people's minds, deaf people's minds. Gallaudet is ready to respond to your questions and concerns. They are more than happy to meet with you, discuss your ideas on what can be done together. Please, we welcome your ideas, your propositions, your initiatives, your search for funding. We want to make this possible. And if we can make this happen, then we have a very exciting future to look forward to. And with that, I thank you.